have three very different kinds of works of art here. And so we'll talk about the differences, of course, in the video lecture, which you watched already. I showed lots of very different kinds of pieces online. And I wanted to also give you an experience of some of that kind of diversity here in the collection. Before I tell you about this piece, let me just ask you, what do you see here? What can you note about what is being shown? Anyone? Call on people. What do you see?
I think traditional Chinese flag.
Yeah? Traditional? Okay, we have a nice landscape scene.
Yeah.
We have a couple of people there. What do these people look like they're doing, or who are they?
Just cleaning the yard. Just cleaning the yard.
Yeah, so this guy is sweeping the yard, and this guy is kind of doing nothing. Any guess on what kind of people these might be? What do you think? Yeah. Huh? Farmer. Yeah, that's kind of what it looks like. You might think that this guy is like some kind of farmer. I mean, obviously, they live out in nature. He has this very simple hut, right? This is like grass roof. So very simple, natural scene. Okay, so let me tell you about this painting. This is a very tricky painting. This is of a real person named Wang Guyan. He is not a farmer. He's actually like the minister of justice for the Qing Dynasty Empire. And this portrait is painted by an artist named Huang Zeng, and it's done in 1755. So in the middle of the 18th century, those of you who know Chinese history know like the 18th century is like maybe the last great kind of era of Chinese strength and cultural flowering in traditional China before like kind of imperialist Western powers started attacking China in the 19th century. So this is a time when Chinese civilization is very confident, very well established, very wealthy, powerful. We can tell by this little inscription in the middle here that basically this is a casual portrait done in honor of this time when this minister was traveling out on the road. He was traveling south and he just stopped in this little local thatched hut and he got someone to do a portrait of him there. Now, of course, you also see lots of calligraphic inscriptions all around the side. And you can tell that these are different hands, right? There's very different calligraphy styles. Like there's different artists. You can see all of the red chops, right? So people, like we have different people who are stamping their own names and doing calligraphy around this. This is utterly common in Chinese art. It's very unusual in the way that Western art historians think about art. Like if you imagine like buying a Picasso and then like writing something on it or like stamping your name on the Picasso, people would be like shocked. Like you're defacing the art, you're ruining it, right? But this is utterly common actually in terms of many kinds of Chinese paintings. Would anyone like to take a guess as to who these people might be that are signing? Even if you can read the 18th century Chinese, it's a little bit far. You might have to get up close for some of these. Would you like to take a guess? Who's signing it and why? No? Would you like to take a guess? That's a great guess. In this case, it isn't, but it's very common that in many kinds of Chinese paintings, you have a long scroll in which collectors buy the painting and then add their own thing to it and almost add value to the painting, and then when they sell it or give it to the next person, then they'll add an inscription. So that's a very common practice in collection. In this case, it's actually something rarer that isn't done as often. These people who have signed all around the painting are actually the friends of Wang Guyuan. And after he had this painting of himself done, he went around to his friends and said, hey, could you add something to my painting? And so they're like, oh gosh, me? I'm so honored. Like, sure, I'll be happy to do that. And so they've added their own inscriptions. I want to focus on what's going on here and how odd it is in terms of what is being shown, right? We have a very simple, natural scene. You said he looks like a farmer. He does. I mean, this is, it looks like some kind of Taoist hermit or a farmer or someone who's living a very simple life out in the wilderness with no social connections. Maybe just one servant to sweep the yard for him. But actually, we know from the history books that he's a powerful member of the central government. He's very wealthy. He has all connections. And moreover, even the fact that we have all of these signatures around the sides shows that this is a very social guy, right? He's not all alone out in the wilderness. He actually has lots of friends who are happy to like write their very beautiful calligraphy and use their stamps and do this sort of elite cooperative kind of art project. And so what I wanted to highlight here is the kind of ironic status of this picture, right? You might probably, when he went back to Beijing, back to the capital, and he had his office, he might have maybe hung this on his wall. And when he's busy like signing documents and legal work and all these papers, you know, he has this picture of himself living the simple life out in the countryside. This is expressing a kind of wish or a desire of something that's patently false, right? He's not that guy. It's the closest thing I can imagine to this is like if you take a photograph, a selfie of yourself in your Halloween costume, and then post it on Instagram and get all your friends to comment, right? That's the kind of social way in which this image is being circulated. And I think what I'd like you to take away from this is the notion that sometimes when we get like images of simplicity or images of, you know, things that we might think of as Taoist, anti-social hermits living out in the wild, you can't necessarily take these images at face value, right? Whether it's in art or in literature, like people who are actually hermits and actually don't want to be recognized by society will tend to not leave behind records. They'll just disappear. So the people who do leave behind records or paintings sometimes aren't sincere. Maybe it's just a costume. Maybe it's just like a pose. So it's saying something about the motivations or the desires of people living very much in the social world. Okay, anyone have questions about this? Okay, then let's move on to the next one over here. And here, maybe if you want to, you can get a little bit closer and take a look at this woman, and then we'll back up and let the camera. But first, okay, go ahead for now. Come on, you can take a closer look at who she is, what she's doing. All right. Yeah, yeah. So those of you who can read the inscription, or maybe, I don't think maybe you recognize her by sight, but this is a goddess, the goddess of the Loa River. Did any of you notice what she's walking on? It's extremely hard to see, and I'm sure it's not going to show up in the video. Can you see? You want to come up and get a close look? You see what she's walking on?
Is it like a
Yeah, she's walking on water. So there's tiny little waves down here. So she's walking on water, and this is fitting because she's the goddess of the Loa River, all right? So this here is a poem, or in English we sometimes say poetic rhapsody, or it's a fu. It's a fu. And the Luo Shen Fu, does anyone know who wrote the Luo Shen Fu? Classical Chinese literature. No? All right. This is by Cao Zhi. So Cao Zhi is a very famous Chinese poet. He's also the younger son of Cao Cao. Many more of you will know who Cao Cao is. This is the general to whom the celestial masters surrendered. And so this poetic rhapsody was written in the early 3rd century AD. The painting is from the late 18th century AD. So the painting was done in 1769. It's by a painter named Shen Zongqian. But the painting with the Fu, this poetic rhapsody, was very famous at the time, and it's had a lot of influence on Chinese literature. It basically tells the story of this poet's encounter with a very lovely, kind of sexy goddess of the river, and there's some hint that maybe he slept with her. And so this is often taken as kind of like a poetic fantasy about like the perfect woman, and a kind of woman who's also unattainable because she's a goddess and she disappears. Sometimes people have thought that the poem was actually about his sister-in-law, like the queen, Lady Zhen, who's the wife of his older brother, Cao Pi. But that's probably false. That's probably just like a nasty rumor that started. But here we have a depiction of this goddess who's supposed to be, in literary tradition, like the ideal woman. And this is actually a very popular subject for painting. This is not the only painting that's been done of the Luo Shen Fu. There's many different examples since at least the Song dynasty. There was a master painter who did one of these, and people were copying it ever since. This particular painting is not really a copy of that Song dynasty painting or the other paintings that derive from it. Instead, this is most likely influenced by the kind of art that one would see on Taoist temple walls. The way in which she's dressed and also the pose, and in particular, like all of these, like the fancy ribbons flowing behind, like she has these kind of ribbons that are wrapped around her shoulder and looks like they're being lifted by the wind and they're curling off behind her. That's very common, that a kind of style that you might see on the wall of a Taoist temple, or a painting that's done specifically for like religious worship purposes, for people who are lighting incense or praying or so on. Let me ask you, do you think that this painting would have been used in a worship setting? What do you think? You don't know? What do you think? Take a guess. That's okay. Too shy. Guess yes or no. No. Correct. Correct. Why might not we have seen this? I mean, if she's done in the style of a Taoist temple painting, why might we expect that this is not something that's being used for worship? How about in the orange sweater? What do you think?
Maybe it's too simple. Like if it's for worship, maybe it should be like more fancy.
Yeah, actually, that's a good idea. Oftentimes, the drawing style does look very much like that worship, but usually images which are used in worship are much more colorful. There's a lot of paint added. This is almost like a sketch, really. There's no color. Even the calligraphy, it's nice calligraphy, but you have the outlines. If you look up closely, you can see the outlines of the like the lines done to allow people to do calligraphy in a straight line. So this whole thing is almost just like a sketch. Why else might we guess that this is not used in a worship setting? Any guesses? Let me call on you in the back, black sweatshirt. Any guesses? Sure. Why might we guess that this is not used in a worship setting? The woman in the picture is? She's not in the human world? Well, that's true. That's true. She's not in the human world, but if she's a god, then that might be a reason you would worship her. I think a better question is, what kind of god is she? Right? If you normally, through this poem, she's normally associated as a figure of sexuality and like alluring, perfect, sort of the perfect woman, right? This is a very literary trope which has made this goddess into almost like a figure of like divine romance. This is a fun thing for male literati to think about and write about and dream about, like the perfect woman. It's not the kind of goddess that you would like go to and pray for like some blessing for your family or something like that. So she's not the right kind of goddess for a lot of worship ceremony, but nonetheless, the painter seems to have borrowed from Taoist religious representations of deities in order to paint this image. So we can tell that this is sort of, this is not Taoist in intent, right? This is meant to hang on the wall of a literatus, right? Someone who's well educated, probably knows the literary tradition well, likes Cao Zhi's poem, but is not going to go worshiping this goddess. It's something to decorate your library with. But the painter is able to use resources from how this kind of image is depicted in more religious work. And so that's another way in which this kind of Taoist imagery is sort of making it into a more secular tradition. Any other questions about this image? All right, if not, then let's move down to our final painting. So I'll start on this side. You can see this is just a poster that I had made up of the full artwork, right? This is a series of scrolls. The whole series is very delicate, so we can only have 2 made up. We would only have to use 2 here in the gallery because it's very expensive, valuable, and delicate. It's not in the best condition. So museums asked me to pick just a couple of scrolls to hang. But here you can see the full thing, right? So those 2 scrolls that are hanging there are these 2, right? This and this. So you can tell that if we actually were to hang the whole thing, this would be huge. This is a monumental painting. It would cover most of this wall. Right? So this is a massive work of art. Of course, something this massive, it's done for a massive context. This is something that you hang on the wall of a palace, or at least of a very large house or a very large office building, someplace where you need you have to have a huge wall, and you have to have the right context for this. And of course, something like this style is going to take the painter a long time to do, a lot of work, and it has to be very expensive. What do you see? What do you see in the scene there, or what do you see here in the image of the whole thing? What does this look like? Maybe I will call on someone. Could I ask the gentleman in the back in the white shirt, what do you see here? If you like, you can come up and take a close look at this. See some trees, all right. We do have lots of trees scattered around. Yeah? What else? Mountains. Yep, the big green blocks are the mountains. So we have a natural scene. What else? What else do you see? It is like a little village, right? Good. So here we have the whole panorama is the natural scene, but then right kind of just off center is the center of the village in this relatively small area, which is what I'm focusing on in choosing these two scrolls. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So we have a particular village located in the middle of a huge natural scene. What do you see going on in the village? Can you see anything that people are doing in here? You can come closer if you want. So who do we have? Let me ask you. What do you see? What are the people doing here? They're having a discussion. So we have some young kids being held by older people, right? We have some guy with an oar. What do you think this guy's job is? What do you think? What's the job of the guy holding the oar? What? Cleaning? No. no. So the oar is what you row the boat with. Yeah. Maybe I'll ask over here. What do you think?
Priest.
A priest? No, we might have some priests elsewhere, but probably the guy holding the oar is, obviously he's just come from the boats, probably a fisherman, maybe? Fisherman, right? And you can see there's a river, right? We have a little bridge going over the river, and we have lots of rural occupation. Over here, we also have a farmer, obviously, someone plowing the fields. We have some rural kinds of labor going on. Right in the middle here, this woman inside the house. At first, I myself couldn't tell what she was doing. And then our curator, Isabel, who's an expert on textiles, pointed out to me that she's actually doing weaving. She's doing weaving. So this is some good kind of rural labor, typical occupations for a little rural community. This is a very special community, though. This is not just any little farm village. This is actually from a famous Chinese myth. Would anyone like to guess of what this is supposed to be a picture of? A famous Chinese myth about a village out in the wilderness. Taohuayuan, yeah, so it's Peach Blossom Spring. This is the story of Peach Blossom Spring. And those of you who don't know this, this is a famous myth about this little village that was kind of lost. During the Qin dynasty, they kind of kept away from the empire. They decided to hide because they didn't want to be involved in all the chaos of the time. And so they hid away, and then they didn't have any contact with the world for centuries. Then a visitor here, a visitor who is the famous poet Tao Yuanming, right? He visits the village, and then they say, "Oh, is it still the Qin dynasty?" And he's like, "No, that's over for like 500 years ago." He has this little story where he describes like how beautiful and how peaceful this is, and this has always been, after that, it's always been an image of like, the perfect society. And it's often thought of as a kind of like Taoist paradise, and Tao Yuanming is thought of as a kind of Taoist poet often. And so here we have, this the visit of the poet depicted to this little paradise out in the wilderness. And it looks very nice. I'd like to go have a vacation there. Now, let me give you a little bit of background about the painting. Just as you might expect from the first painting we talked about, like there's a little bit of a contradiction here as well. Like we have a great painting of Peach Blossom Spring, but this is a huge, very expensive series of paintings to hang on the wall. It's obviously for a very wealthy patron. So again, we have like the image of paradise out in the rural area, but this is being used and portrayed in a very socially centered elite context. So it's sort of, again, a kind of feeling of escapism, of like maybe expressing a desire of something you can't have actually in life. Now the artist who painted this is a guy named Yuan Jiang. He was actually one of the most famous painters, landscape painters of the Qing dynasty. So this is really incredibly lucky for the U of A that we have one of his paintings here. Yuan Jiang was a court painter, so he worked for the Qing emperor. This painting was done in 1719, and just after he finished this painting in the 1720s, he was then hired by the emperor to live and work in the royal court. So this is incredibly elite, one of the most famous painters, and done in a style which, even though this painting itself wasn't done for the palace, he would later do paintings like this for the palace, and this was probably hanging in a very elite collector's house before them. I think I'm gonna, I can't quite see it from here. If you take a look at the full scale of the poster again, back over here, and you can get a little closer if you need to. You notice that we are seeing Peach Blossom Spring again from a kind of angle, right? The mountains here, if you look at the way this is structured, like the mountains are coming around and almost capturing the village, forming a sort of wall around it. And then you have a little bit of a wall on the other side as well. In the myth, one of the reasons that the Peach Blossom Spring was so peaceful and perfect is that it stayed hidden from the outside world for centuries. So Tao Yuanming was one of just a few people who ever saw this place. And after he left it, he could never find it again. And that's part of the myth as well, is that when you find paradise, don't leave it, because you'll never get another chance. And here we can see how the artist is using the mountains to almost hide the village from our view. And that's expressing the way in which this is hidden and almost kept a secret. If you remember from the video lecture, there was another painting that I talked about, the monk entering the cave heaven, where there's these sort of mountains blocking the entrance to the cave, and from the perspective of the viewer, you can just barely see into the mouth of the cave, right? And I mentioned that this adds to the mysteriousness of it, and it expresses the way in which like these Taoist secrets are kind of hidden from most people. And the same technique is being used here. We are being given some privileged access as a viewer. We're standing ourselves up on some mountain. We're very lucky. We can just barely see down into this village. But you can see how this is being hidden from most of the world. And so in here, the painter is sort of using the form of the composition of the landscape to help tell the story, right? And also to help express an ideal about these kinds of like Taoist paradises, of how they're not for everyone. Most people aren't allowed to see this, but you're lucky. You get to have a little peek inside. Okay. Any questions about this painting? Yes. About the Peach Blossom Spring? There's plenty of other paintings. This is a popular topic for other painters as well. I think that this is one of the biggest, right? One of the grandest, and also I'd say one of the best examples, certainly from the Qing Dynasty, of this theme being painted. Oftentimes you'll get like maybe someone painting a single scroll of Peach Blossom Spring, but this kind of multi-scroll set that would occupy a whole wall is really something else. So it's a little bit unusual in that respect. Good question, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Is this something?
Oops.
Is this something that would as one single scroll and then cut?
Thankfully, the poster is only worth $20. If those fell, that would be a problem. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Was this something that, like, at the beginning was one enormous piece of parchment and then cut it afterwards?
No, it would have been done in individual scrolls, yeah, because they know this is how. I mean, almost all painting is done in scrolls rather than canvases, as in the Western case. So the painter deliberately would have set it up. There maybe in the process of composition, right? He would have been doing it together, because otherwise you can't quite get everything to match. So you put it here, but it was always intended to be hung as a series. A good question. Thanks. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, then thank you very much for coming. The rest of you are off for this week. Your signature on the paper is all that I needed. Everyone who's watching this online, you have to go and do the exercise on eClass when you're done watching this. And then everyone else, remember that for next week, we will be having a class only on Wednesday, right? With the guest lecture by the Chinese doctor. Okay. All right. Thanks very much. And see you next week then.